She's a waitress, drowning in debt and haunted by a past she buried 5 years ago. He's a ruthless billionaire, a man who sees the world and everyone in it as his personal chessboard. When he condescendingly invites her to play a simple game for his amusement, he thinks he's about to be entertained by a novice. He doesn't know he's not challenging a waitress. He's challenging a phantom. He's just invited a forgotten genius, a legend known in the shadows of the chess world as Kestrel, to a game she cannot afford to lose. What happens when a pawn is revealed to be a queen? Stay tuned, as this game is for everything. The scent of seared scallops and old money hung heavy in the air of the onyx spire. For Ivy Rowan, that scent was the smell of her gilded cage. At 24, her life had contracted to the squeak of her worn-out loafers on polished marble, the ache in her lower back, and the forced, brittle smile she offered to people who spent more on a bottle of wine than she made in a month. Her apron, starched to the point of abrasion, felt like a harness. She balanced a tray of crystal water goblets, her reflection rippling in their pristine surfaces. All she saw were the dark circles under her eyes and the ghost of a person who used to dream of complex positions and elegant endgames. Now, her dreams were mundane, terrifyingly practical, making rent for her tiny studio apartment and the ever-present, crushing weight of her younger brother's medical bills. His heart, erratic and fragile, was a ticking clock she was failing to outrun. Tonight, the pressure was worse. The VIP alcove, booth 12, was occupied. Conrad Wechsler was not just rich. He was a titan, a predator of the tech and finance world. His company, Wechsler Innovations, was infamous for its hostile takeovers, disrupting industries by gutting them and selling the scraps. He was a man with a bored, cruel intelligence, and he treated the world as an intellectual exercise he was determined to win. He was dining with Pierce Donovan, his second-in-command, a man with the watchful, quiet intensity of a panther. They were celebrating their latest kill, the acquisition of a rival software firm. It was hardly a challenge, Pierce, Wechsler drawled, swirling a dark liquid in his glass. He was handsome in a severe, joyless way. The CEO folded like a cheap suit. No vision, no guts. He was a decent man, Conrad, Pierce noted, his voice smooth. Decency is a luxury for those who've already lost, Wechsler scoffed. His eyes roamed the opulent dining room, landing on a decorative marble chessboard set up on a small table near his alcove. Now that has structure, logic, a perfect closed system. Pity I have no one to play with. The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man perpetually composed of anxiety and cheap cologne, overheard this. He scurried over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Wechsler, sir. A game? I could call my son. He's quite good at the university club. Or perhaps," Wechsler cut him off with a languid, dismissive wave. "No, I don't want a player. I want a distraction, a diversion." His cold, assessing gaze swept past Henderson, past the other obsequious waiters, and landed, with predatory focus, on Ivy. She was standing perfectly still by the service station, trying to become invisible. "Her," Wechsler said, pointing. Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Henderson's face went from pale to ashen. "Sir? Ms. Rowan? She's just a waitress, sir." "Excellent. She can wait, and she can play. Send her over." A few of the other servers heard. Brenda, a woman with sharp elbows and a sharper tongue, who was perpetually competing with Ivy for the good sections, let out a barely concealed snicker. "Go on, Ivy," she whispered, shoving her slightly. "The king wants to play with his food." Ivy felt a hot flush of humiliation. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to quit, to throw the tray of water at his smug, entitled face. But then she thought of the eviction notice tucked inside her locker. She thought of the pharmacy's payment overdue calls. She set the tray down. She smoothed her apron. She walked toward the booth. "You wanted me, sir?" she asked, her voice a low, professional monotone. Conrad Wechsler looked her up and down, a slow, insulting appraisal. "Do you know the rules of chess, darling? How the little horses move?" Ivy's hands, hidden in the folds of her apron, curled into fists. 5 years. 5 years since she'd touched a piece. 5 years since the incident, since the shouting, the accusations, and the slam of the door on her entire future. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "I know how the horses move." "Good." Wechsler gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit. Play me. Just for fun. We'll even pretend you have a chance." Pierce Donovan watched, his expression unreadable. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. Ivy pulled out the chair. The marble was cold beneath her trembling fingers. She took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of scallops and arrogance, and sat down. "White or black, sir?" Wechsler smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "I always play white. I like to make the first move." He pushed his king's pawn forward 2 spaces, a standard, aggressive opening. Ivy stared at the board. The 64 squares, once her entire universe, stared back, alien and familiar. The humiliation, the fear, the desperation, it all began to recede. A different part of her brain, a part she had starved and locked away, began to flicker, like a pilot light in a storm. She reached out and, with a steady hand, mirrored his move. The restaurant didn't stop, but it hushed. The clinking of cutlery softened, and the whispers from the kitchen grew louder. Mr. Henderson was hovering nearby, looking like a man watching his own execution. Brenda had accidentally positioned herself at a nearby table, polishing silverware with furious, jealous energy. Her eyes locked on Ivy. Conrad Wechsler was a book player. Ivy knew the type. He played with the aggressive, unearned confidence of a man who has read the first chapter of a manual and declared himself a master. He opened with the Ruy Lopez, a classic, respectable, and utterly predictable line. He was playing at her, not with her. "A simple opening," he explained, as if to a child. "We establish control of the center. See?" Ivy said nothing. Her mind was a whirlwind. She was back in a crowded, stuffy tournament hall in Prague. She was 13. Her father, his face red with ambition and pressure, was hissing in her ear. "Don't just win, Kestrel. Annihilate him. Show them what you are." Kestrel. That was her call sign, her online handle, her name, a small, fast, vicious bird of prey, the name given to her by the anonymous, faceless masters she had dismantled in online blitz tournaments, the name that was, for a few brilliant years, whispered with awe in the digital chess world. Kestrel 9, the girl who had, at 14, checkmated Grandmaster Anton Volkov in a simultaneous online exhibition, a feat he'd later called a beautiful, terrifying surprise. And then, the collapse, the Youth World Championship, the final match, the unbearable pressure from her father, an illegal move, a dropped piece, a moment of panic. She'd lost. Her father, incandescent with rage, had stormed the stage, accusing her opponent of cheating, overturning the table. The result was chaos, a disqualification, a public shaming, not for cheating, but for conduct. Her father's conduct, but the stain had splattered onto her. She'd never touched a piece in public again. She'd run away from home, changed her name from her father's to her mother's, and disappeared into the anonymous grind of the service industry. "Darling, are you lost?" Wechsler's voice snapped her back. He had developed his pieces, His bishop was aimed at her king side. He was setting up a simple textbook fork. Ivy looked at the board. The fog in her head was gone. The noise of the restaurant, Wexler's condescending drone, Brenda's hateful stare, it all evaporated. There was only the board. Her hand moved. She didn't play the correct defensive move. She didn't block his bishop. Instead, she pushed a pawn on the queen side. A slow, seemingly unrelated, weird move. Wexler's brow furrowed. That's an interesting choice. And by interesting, I mean wrong. He continued his attack. He was a shark that smelled blood, but he was attacking a ghost. Ivy's responses were quiet, subtle. She gave up a pawn, then another. Brenda muttered to another waiter, "She's just giving them to him. She's hopeless." Wexler was grinning now, leaning back. "It's all right, dear. Not everyone is cut out for this." He captured her knight. "I believe that's what we call a blunder." "Yes, sir," Ivy said softly. He was now up 3 pawns and a knight. He was dominating. He had her queen pinned. It looked like a massacre. "It's over, darling," he drawled, signaling Henderson for another $800 bottle of wine. "Shall we call it a night, or do you want to see the checkmate?" Ivy looked at the board. Her king was exposed. Her queen was trapped. It was a lost cause. For him. "You have a very strong attack, sir," she said. And then she moved her rook. A simple 2-space slide. Wexler paused. He looked at the rook. He looked at his own pieces. The move made no sense. It didn't defend anything. It didn't attack anything. It was just a move. "Fine," he said, and proceeded with his crushing attack. He moved his bishop, preparing the final 3-move mating net. Ivy moved her rook again. Back to where it started. Wexler stopped. Are you just moving pieces at random?" "No, sir." He looked again, really looked. His attack, her rook, his bishop, her other rook. He suddenly saw it. His crushing attack was a mirage. If he moved his bishop, her rook would block. If he moved his queen, her knight, which he'd ignored, would fork him. His entire beautiful, aggressive structure was balanced on a knife's edge, and the move she had just made, the rook slide. "A draw," Pierce Donovan said, his voice quiet, his eyes sharp. He'd been watching the board, not the players. "It's a draw by repetition. If you move your bishop, she moves her rook. If you move anything else, she takes your queen." Wexler's smile vanished. He stared at the pieces. It was true. He was trapped. Not in a mating net, but in a loop. A perfect, inescapable, humiliating draw. He, Conrad Wexler, with a 3-pawn advantage, had been forced into a stalemate by a waitress. "Beginner's luck," Wexler snapped, his voice a low growl. He was clearly flustered. "You defended. You played for a draw. How common. How boring." He was rattled, but his arrogance reasserted itself. He was intrigued, not impressed. He saw it as a fluke. Ivy began to stand up, her legs shaking. "Thank you for the game, sir. If you'll excuse me." "Sit down," he commanded. The charm was gone. His eyes were hard. The fun is just beginning. The temperature in the alcove had dropped 20 degrees. Conrad Wexler was no longer bored. He was annoyed. A draw felt like a loss. It was an imperfection in his perfect evening, a speck of dust on his flawless reputation. "You're a defensive player," he spat, resetting the pieces with sharp, angry movements. "All you did was react. You didn't play. You just survived." "Mr. Wexler, sir," Henderson tried to interject. "Ms. Rowan really must get back to her." "Silence," Wexler snapped, not even looking at him. His eyes were locked on Ivy. "I find surviving to be a rather pedestrian ambition," Ivy's hands were trembling again, but this time with a cold, suppressed rage. Pedestrian. This man, who had never known a day of hunger, who saw a $20,000 loss in the stock market as an oops, was lecturing her on survival. "I find," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "that survival is often the most strategic move of all." Pierce Donovan, who had been silent, let out a small, appreciative huff of air. Wexler's eyes narrowed. He was used to sycophants and people who were terrified of him. This quiet, impoverished girl was talking back. "A philosopher," he sneered. "How quaint. Let's see if your philosophy can handle this." He reached into his breast pocket, past the silk handkerchief, and pulled out a slim platinum checkbook. He scribbled on it, tore out the check, and slapped it onto the table. $20,000, he said. The restaurant went silent. Brenda, who was nearby, audibly gasped. "One game," Wexler declared. "Right here, right now. Winner take all. If you win, you walk out of this diner with 20 grand. Enough to buy a new pair of shoes, perhaps." He glanced at her worn loafers. "And if I win," he continued, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you just go back to clearing plates. You admit in front of everyone that it was a fluke, and that I am and always will be the superior player. Oh, and you pay for my wine." It was a cruel, petty, arrogant wager. It was designed to humiliate her, whether she won or lost. "Conrad," Pierce said, his voice low, "this is unseemly. I call it raising the stakes, Pierce. Everything is a negotiation." Ivy stared at the check. $20,000. It wasn't a number. It was a solution. It was the down payment for her brother's heart procedure. It was 6 months of rent and food. It was a breath of air. It was a path out of the suffocating, water-filled trench of her life. And this man was using it as a prop, a toy. Brenda was vibrating with undisguised jealousy. "Mr. Henderson, she can't," she hissed, loud enough for Wexler to hear. "She's on the clock. This is against all regulations." Wexler, without looking away from Ivy, waved a manicured hand. "I'm buying her time, you ridiculous woman. What's her hourly? $15? 20? I'll pay the restaurant $1,000 for the inconvenience. Now shut up." Brenda's face turned a mottled, furious red. All eyes were on Ivy. The weight of the room, the weight of her entire life, pressed down on her. The chess prodigy inside her, Kestrel, was screaming. "He's a book player. He's arrogant. His ego is a liability. You can break him." But the waitress, Ivy, was terrified. "What if I lose? What if I'm rusty? What if he's better than I think?" She looked at the check. Then she looked at Wexler's smug, expectant face. He thought he was buying a game. He thought he was setting a trap. He didn't realize he was caging a hawk. "One game," Ivy said, her voice shaking but resolute. "But I have a condition." Wexler's eyebrow shot up. "A condition? The pauper dictates terms." "If I win," Ivy said, meeting his gaze, "you pay the $20,000. And you apologize to Mr. Henderson. You've made him sweat through his suit. And he's a good man." A ripple of shock went through the staff. Henderson looked at Ivy with something akin to worship. Brenda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Pierce Donovan didn't bother to hide his smile this time. He let out a short, sharp laugh. Wexler was momentarily stunned. He stared at her, this slip of a girl in a cheap apron, and then he, too, began to laugh. It was a cold, sharp, barking sound. "Done," he boomed. "A full groveling apology to... what's his name?" He snapped his fingers at Henderson. "And I'll even throw in the dry cleaning bill." He gestured to the board. "This time, darling, I get the white pieces again. And I will not be... boring." "No, sir," Ivy said, her hands sliding under the table to rest on her knees. This time I'll be playing white. She reached out and spun the board 180 degrees. The black pieces were now in front of Wechsler. His smile froze. The power dynamic, in one simple, physical move, had just been ripped from his grasp. "Your move, Mr. Wechsler," Ivy said. The second game was not a game. It was an autopsy. Ivy, playing white, did not open with a standard, respectable line. She didn't play the Ruy Lopez. She didn't play the Queen's gambit. She pushed her king's bishop's pawn forward 2 spaces. Wechsler stared. It was an antique. The King's Gambit, a romantic, reckless, almost suicidal opening from the 19th century. It was an invitation to chaos, a "here, take my pawn, and let's have a knife fight in this alley" kind of move. No serious modern player opened with it. It was unsound. "You're joking," Wechsler said, a small, nervous laugh escaping him. "I never joke about chess, sir," Ivy replied, her voice flat. Wechsler, an arrogant but fundamentally modern player, accepted the gambit. He took the pawn. He followed the book. Ivy didn't. She didn't try to reclaim the pawn. She didn't follow the 300-year-old lines of defense. She developed her knight to a weird square. Then she fianchettoed her queen's bishop. Her king was left exposed. Her pawn structure was a mess. It looked like the scattered, panicked moves of a true beginner. "My God," Brenda whispered to another waiter. "She's lost her mind. She's just handing him the game." Wechsler thought so too. He was gleeful. He was a predator, and his prey was bleeding. He launched a brutal, coordinated attack, bringing his queen, his rooks, and his bishops to bear on her undefended king. His pieces swarmed her side of the board. The game was fast. Moves were being made with machine gun rapidity. Ivy's hand was a blur. She never hesitated. She never pondered. She just moved. Wechsler was playing offense, but Ivy was calculating. Pierce Donovan was no longer watching the players. He was watching the board, his phone out, his thumb scrolling rapidly through what looked like a database. His brow was furrowed in intense concentration. "Gotcha," Wechsler growled. He'd found it. A beautiful 3-move mating combination. He moved his queen to h5. Check. Ivy's king was forced to move. He moved his bishop to f7. Check. Ivy's king was forced into the corner. "And now," Wechsler said, his voice dripping with triumph. He raised his hand to move his knight, the final, fatal blow. "Checkmate." "No," Ivy said. Wechsler's hand froze. "What did you say?" "I said no," Ivy repeated. She gestured to the board. "You can't move your knight there. It's pinned." Wechsler looked. His knight, her bishop, the one she'd fianchettoed on the other side of the board 10 moves ago, the one he'd dismissed as a beginner's mistake. It was sitting there, a silent sniper, aiming a laser beam of control straight across the diagonal, a beam that went directly through his queen and was aimed at his own king. His knight was pinned. His entire attack was a house of cards, and she had just pulled out the foundation. But, your king," he stammered. "My king is fine," Ivy said. "Yours, however." And now Wechsler saw it. His own pieces, which he had so aggressively pushed forward, were now in his way. His queen was blocking his rook. His pawns were clogging his escape squares. He had built his own prison. That sequence," Pierce Donovan whispered, his voice shaking. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "I've seen this before." "What are you babbling about, Pierce?" Wechsler snapped, his face pale and sweating. He was frantically trying to find a move, any move, that didn't result in his immediate and total collapse. The king's gambit, the weird knight, the bishop fianchetto, the queen and rook sacrifice. Pierce held up his phone. On the screen was an article from a chess blog dated 5 years ago. The headline read, "Who is Kestrel 9, the online phantom who dismantled a grandmaster?" "It's a signature," Pierce said, his voice full of awe. "The Kestrel's nest. It's an online legend. It's a trap. It lures the opponent into a winning attack, but every attacking piece is secretly being used to build the opponent's own cage." He looked from the phone to Ivy. Her face was pale, her eyes luminous, like she was in a trance. "You," Pierce breathed. "You're Kestrel 9. You're the one who beat Anton Volkov in that blitz game. The one who disappeared." The name hung in the air. Kestrel. Brenda scoffed. "Kestrel? What's that? Some kind of cartoon?" But Wexler knew. His face had gone from white to a sickening shade of grey. He was a tech billionaire. He followed the online world. He knew the legends. Ivy's eyes, cold and sharp as a hawk's, met his. The waitress was gone. The timid, trembling girl had evaporated. In her place sat a grandmaster. A genius. "You were disqualified," Wexler whispered, remembering the story. "A cheater." The word hit Ivy like a physical slap. The trance broke. The old familiar shame and rage flooded back. "I did not cheat," she said, her voice a low, vibrating growl. "I was a 14-year-old girl whose father broke. He couldn't stand that I lost. He screamed at the judges. He threw the board. They disqualified me for his actions. To make an example." She took a shaky breath. "And for 5 years, I let that lie defined me. I let cowards like you, who think money makes you a king, look at me like I was dirt." She looked back at the board. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "You're not in a drawer, Mr. Wexler. You're not in a pin." She picked up her rook, the one she'd been holding in reserve, and slid it with a heavy, final thud onto the back rank. "You're in a Zugzwang." Zugzwang. The German word was as precise and cruel as the position itself. It meant compulsion to move. It was the ultimate positional torture in chess. It meant that Wexler's position was not yet lost, but any move he made, any move at all, would lead to his immediate, catastrophic destruction. He was forced to be the author of his own demise. Conrad Wexler stared at the board, his high-priced intellect running 1,000,000 calculations a second, and coming up with the same answer: doom. If he moved his pawn, Ivy's queen would take his rook. If he moved his king, Ivy's bishop would checkmate him. If he moved his anything, he lost. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in abandoned glasses. Mr. Henderson was holding his breath. Brenda's jaw was slack, her expression of smug superiority having melted into one of pure, uncomprehending shock. Wexler was trapped, publicly, by his own arrogance and by a woman he had dismissed as a piece of furniture. This is impossible," he stammered. The sweat was beading on his forehead, running down his temples and staining the collar of his $5,000 shirt. This is a trick." "It's not a trick, Mr. Wexler," Ivy said, her voice a cold, sharp echo in the silent room. "It's called consequences. You built your attack with no foundation. You overextended. You left your king to die. You were greedy." Every word was a hammer blow. She wasn't just talking about the game. Wexler looked around, his eyes wild. He saw the stares. He saw the whispers. He saw Pierce Donovan, his face a mask of cold judgment. He saw the waitress. This nothing, looking at him not with triumph, but with a kind of clinical pity. And that was what he couldn't stand, the pity. You, he sputtered, his mind short-circuiting, his vast ego collapsing under the weight of his public humiliation. He couldn't articulate a defense. He couldn't find an excuse. So he reacted. With a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, Conrad Wechsler swept his arm across the board. The heavy marble pieces went flying. The king and queen clattered to the floor. The pawns scattered like frightened birds. The board itself skidded off the table and crashed onto the marble, cracking a tile. "You cheated!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I am not paying a single cent to a cheater, a nobody!" He jabbed a finger at Ivy, his whole body trembling. "You think you're smart? You're just a girl serving coffee. You're nothing. This was a setup. You all set me up." The restaurant erupted. Diners leapt from their seats. Mr. Henderson yelped, "Mr. Wechsler, please!" Ivy didn't flinch. She just watched him, her expression unreadable, as the most powerful man in the room reduced himself to a screaming, petulant child. Brenda, seeing her chance to regain favor and destroy her rival in one move, sprang into action. "Mr. Henderson!" she shouted, her voice ringing with false outrage. "Did you see that? She provoked him. She agitated a guest. She's a con artist. She must have hustled him. She should be fired. Fire her." Mr. Henderson, a small man caught between a rampaging bear and his own livelihood, looked at Wechsler's apoplectic, purple face. He looked at the shattered board. He looked at the other VIP diners, who were now looking at him with disgust. He made the calculation. Wechsler was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to this restaurant. Ivy was disposable. He turned to Ivy. His face was a mask of pained, spineless regret. "Miss Rowan," he said, his voice trembling, I'm afraid, given the circumstances, the disruption, I'm going to have to ask you to clock out and don't come back." Ivy stared at him. Fired. After everything. After the humiliation, the condescension, the fear. After winning, she was fired. No 20,000, no apology, no job. Just the scattered pieces of a game she had, by all accounts, won. She looked at Wechsler, who was panting, straightening his tie, a look of ugly, spiteful triumph on his face. He'd lost the game, but he'd won the war. He'd put her back in her place. Ivy's shoulders slumped. The fire in her eyes died, replaced by the familiar, cold ache of defeat. She untied her soiled apron, her hands moving with a slow, numb deliberation. She dropped it on the floor, on top of Wechsler's toppled king. She turned without a word and began to walk out of the restaurant. "Wait." The voice was not Wechsler's. It was not Henderson's. It was Pierce Donovan. He had not moved during Wechsler's tantrum. He simply stood, watching, and on his phone, which he'd been holding up, a small red light was blinking. He had been recording. Everything. "Conrad," Pierce said, his voice as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, "you are an embarrassment. And you're a fool." "Pierce," Wechsler warned, "stay out of this." "I'm afraid I can't." Pierce turned to the horrified Mr. Henderson. "My associate, and I will be vacating the premises, and we will not be returning. We will also be divesting from your parent company's stock first thing tomorrow morning." Henderson's knees buckled. Pierce then looked past Wechsler, his eyes on Ivy's retreating back. "Ms. Rowan," he called out, his voice clear and strong. "A word, please, on the sidewalk. I have a feeling we have a much, much better offer for you." The cold November air hit Ivy's face like a physical slap, a brutal, shocking contrast to the stifling, perfume-choked atmosphere of the Onyx Spire. She was standing on the curb, the sound of the city traffic, a dull, distant roar, her body shaking from a volatile cocktail of adrenaline, rage, and a despair so deep it felt like drowning. She had won. Kestrel had won. She had played a perfect game, a game for the ages, and had psychologically and tactically dismantled one of the most powerful men in the city. And Ivy Rowan had been fired. The humiliation was a physical ache. She could still see the smug, victorious sneer on Brenda's face as she'd walked out. She could feel the stares of the other diners, their expressions a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. She had been the evening's entertainment, a gladiator who had won the crowd, but been executed by the emperor. She was unemployed. She was $20,000 poorer than she had been promised. That number wasn't a luxury. It was a lifeline. It was her brother Leo's surgery. It was the eviction notice. It was the wall of debt that was, at this very moment, about to come crashing down on her. The roaring, soaring triumph of Kestrel, the genius, had just been suffocated by the pathetic, crushing reality of Ivy Rowan, the failure. She wrapped her thin cardigan around herself, a useless defense against the cold, and stared unseeing at the passing headlights. She had no apron to return. She had no locker to clean out. She just was. A ghost on a street corner with nowhere to go. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open, the sound making her flinch. She half expected Henderson to come out and demand she pay for the broken marble tile. But it was Pierce Donovan. He stepped out, shrugging on a tailored cashmere coat, looking as calm and unbothered as if he'd just finished a pleasant, unremarkable dinner. He looked at Ivy, not with pity, but with a kind of bright, clinical fascination. "That was," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the traffic noise, "the single most extraordinary display of tactical and psychological warfare I have ever witnessed. And I sit in hostile merger meetings for a living." Ivy just stared at him, numb. The words didn't compute. I was fired." "You were liberated," Pierce corrected, offering her a thin, genuine smile. He started to say something else, but the doors burst open again, far more violently this time. Conrad Wexler stormed out onto the sidewalk, his face still a mottled, unhealthy purple. His tie was askew, his composure utterly shattered. He was a king without a kingdom, and he was incandescent with a rage that had nowhere to go. "Pierce!" Wexler roared, jabbing a trembling finger at his second-in-command. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? You don't walk out on me. You work for me. And you certainly," he spat, gesturing at Ivy with profound disgust, "do not side with the help over me." Ivy flinched at the word. Pierce, however, didn't move a muscle. He simply turned, his panther quietness gone, replaced by a cold, sharp energy. "Conrad, you and I are done," Pierce said, his voice flat. "I've been looking for an exit for months. Your behavior tonight has simply accelerated the timeline. You'll find my resignation, effective immediately, in your inbox. It's time-stamped 2 minutes ago." Wexler's jaw dropped. The sheer, calculated premeditation of it stunned him. You're quitting? After 10 years? Over her?" "I'm quitting," Pierce said, taking a calm step toward him. "Because you are a liability. I'm quitting because you are a bully, a cheat, and worst of all, you're a sloppy player." That last word, sloppy, hit Wexler harder than any curse. "You just defaulted on a public, 6-figure wager." "It was 20,000, Wexler snarled. "Was it?" Pierce held up his phone. The screen was dark, but a small red light was blinking in the corner. "You see, Conrad, I've been recording since you first invited Miss Rowan to your table. Your offer, her acceptance, the game, the Zugzwang, and your, shall we call it, energetic concession. This video, which I've already backed up to a secure server, is currently being analyzed by the legal team at the New York Times. Wexler's blood drained from his face. And just for flavor, Pierce continued, his voice a lethal whisper, I'm also sending a copy to the Fader Ethics Committee. You're a high-profile patron of the sport, Conrad. They're going to love this. This isn't a chess matter, Wexler stammered, his eyes wide with panic. It was a private game. Oh, but it is, Pierce said. Unethical conduct, defaulting on a wager. It's a terrible look. But that's not the real problem, is it? Pierce took another step, closing the distance. Wexler, for the first time, involuntarily recoiled. The real problem, Pierce whispered, is that I'm also sending this video to the entire board of Wexler Innovations, right now. He held up the phone, his thumb hovering over the send button. How do you think the shareholders will feel knowing their CEO's public stress test involves defaulting on debts, assaulting staff, and, well, this? He hit send. The small whoosh sound was as loud as a gunshot in the sudden silence. Conrad Wexler looked, for the first time in his life, like a man who had truly been checkmated. The bluster, the rage, the arrogance, it all deflated, leaving a hollow, grey-faced shell. He looked from his phone, which was now vibrating with incoming alerts, to Pierce, to Ivy. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He turned, not in a storm, but in a defeated stumble. He half fell into his waiting limousine, not like a king entering his carriage, but like a fugitive escaping a crime scene. The black car sped away, merging into the traffic and disappearing. The sidewalk was quiet again, save for the distant city sounds. Ivy was breathless. She was staring at the space where the limo had been. You did that. You recorded all of it. For me. Pierce pocketed his phone and finally turned his full attention to her. His expression was no longer that of an executioner. It was warm and deeply serious. I didn't do that for you, Ms. Rowan, he said gently. I did it for me. I've been wanting to leave that circus for years. You just gave me the perfect exit strategy. You created the opening. I just played the combination. He studied her, his gaze assessing. Kestrel 9. My God. I used to follow your games online. You were a poet at the board. What happened in Prague, the disqualification, it was a travesty. A crime. The validation, the fact that this stranger knew her, that he remembered, was almost too much. It was a long time ago, Ivy whispered, the cold reality crashing back. And now I don't even have a job. No, Pierce said. You don't. He reached into his coat and pulled out, not a checkbook, but a slim, elegant business card case. He handed her a card. Pierce Donovan, CEO, Griffin Strategic Capital. Ivy read it, confused. Griffin, I thought you worked for Wexler. Griffin Strategic is my private equity firm. I've been building it in secret for a year, Pierce explained. I was Wexler's head of acquisitions. Yes. It was the perfect position to see which companies he undervalued, so I could invest in them later. I told you, I've been playing a long game. He smiled. And I'm also the chairman of the U.S. Chess Foundation. We sponsor and train the next generation of American grandmasters. Ivy's head swam. I don't understand. That, Ms. Rowan, he said, tapping the card she was holding, is an offer. Not a job as a waitress, not a handout, a sponsorship, a full professional 6-figure sponsorship. We'll cover your living expenses. We'll pay for your brother's medical care, all of it. We'll get you the best coaches, the best trainers. We want you to re-enter the professional circuit. We want Kestrel. Ivy's legs gave out. She sat heavily on the stone planter by the curb, the thick card clutched in her hand. Her brother's medical care. All of it. A breath she didn't even know she'd been holding for 5 years, shuddered out of her. "A mind like yours," Pierce said, his voice gentle but firm. "It doesn't belong on a balance tray. It belongs on the world stage. You're not a pawn, Ivy. You're a queen. You forgot how to move." He looked back at the glass doors of the onyx spire. Inside, through the window, Ivy could just make out the figures of Mr. Henderson and Brenda, staring out at them, their faces pale masks of pure, uncomprehending shock. "As for your $20,000, Pierce said, "don't worry about that. I have a feeling Mr. Wexler will be paying that. With interest. Very, very soon. But that's just beginner's luck. The real game starts now." Tears, hot and fast, streamed down Ivy's face. They weren't tears of sadness or fear or even humiliation. They were tears of release. The weight of 5 years, the shame, the running, the constant, grinding terror of poverty. It was over. She stood up slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the business card. Then she looked at Pierce Donovan. The timid, trembling girl had evaporated. The waitress was gone. "When?" she asked, her voice, for the first time, not the voice of Ivy, but of Kestrel. "Do we start?" The video, as Pierce Donovan had surgically predicted, did not just go online. It detonated. It was a cultural atom bomb. By the time Ivy woke up the next morning, her phone, a 5-year-old model with a cracked screen, had melted into an unusable brick of notifications. She saw the headlines on a bodega TV. "Billionaire bully versus chess genius waitress." Pierce's recording, which he had edited with the precision of a psychological thriller, was everywhere. It showed the split screen, Conrad Wexler's condescending invitation next to Ivy's quiet, steady-handed moves. It showed the Kestrel's nest trap unfolding, with expert commentary already overlaid by anonymous chess YouTubers who had recognized the signature. But the clip that went truly, irreversibly viral was the tantrum. Wexler's roar, the violent sweep of his arm, the marble pieces scattering, his face a purple mask of apoplectic rage. It was all set to classical music. It became an instant, iconic meme for spectacular failure. Kestrel returns and Ordner Zugzwang Wexler trended on every platform for 72 hours straight. The fallout for Conrad Wexler was not a negotiation. It was an execution. The board of Wexler Innovations, facing a staggering 22% drop in stock value by noon, held an emergency meeting. They were inundated with calls from shareholders, not just about the PR disaster, but about the ethics. The video was a perfect, self-contained portrait of a man with no impulse control, no honor, and a terrifyingly volatile ego. He was, as Pierce had called him, a liability. Wexler was summarily fired. The press release called it resigning to pursue other interests. The $20,000 was wired to a new bank account Pierce had set up for Ivy before she'd even had breakfast. As her first act, Ivy, via the newly formed Kestrel Foundation, donated the entire sum to the American Heart Association. The public loved her for it. But for Wexler, it was just the beginning. The public scrutiny on his energetic concession opened the floodgates. The SEC, spurred by anonymous tips, all of which, coincidentally, originated from Pierce Donovan's new firm, opened a formal investigation. His hostile takeovers, when re-examined in the bright, unforgiving light of public hatred, looked a lot more like illegal market manipulation. For Ivy, life transformed from a black and white grind to overwhelming, high-saturation color. The first and most important change was the sound of a hospital room. 2 weeks later, she sat not in a waiting room fearing a bill, but in a private recovery suite, watching the steady, strong beep of a heart monitor. Her younger brother Leo, his color already returning, woke from the anesthetic of his life-saving procedure. He looked at her, his eyes clear and free of the bluish tinge she'd grown to dread. "You're a superhero, Ivy," he whispered. Ivy just held his hand, tears blurring her vision. "I'm a chess player." The US Chess Foundation, chaired by Pierce, moved them both into a quiet, comfortable apartment. For the first time in 5 years, Ivy slept for 8 straight hours. Then, the work began. Her new coach was a grizzled Russian grandmaster named Borov, a man who looked like he had been carved from granite and then left out in the snow. He was unimpressed by her newfound fame. "So," he'd grunted on their first day, in a room filled only with boards, "you are the kestrel. You were a hawk in a cage. You were pecking at scraps, forgetting you have talons. You have spent 5 years surviving. Survival is not victory." He was brutal. He dismantled her game piece by piece. The rust on her genius was, as he put it, merely patina on a masterpiece, but it had to be scoured away. He didn't just drill openings, he rebuilt her philosophy. "That waitress," he would say, tapping his rook against the board, "she is useful. She is patient. She can stand for 10 hours enduring fools and smiling. Good. Let her teach you patience. That girl, the one in Prague, she is also useful. She is rage. She is fire. Let her teach you to attack." Under his tutelage, Ivy's 2 selves, the long-suffering waitress and the fiery, humiliated prodigy, merged. The patience of her old life gave her the spine for agonizingly long, grinding endgames. The pressure of her brother's illness, the constant, ticking clock desperation, had forged a new, terrifying ruthlessness. She didn't just want to win, she wanted to conclude. She re-entered the professional circuit. The press followed her everywhere, dubbing her the Queen of the Spire. At first, other players, all men who had been in the game for years, looked at her with skepticism. They saw a media gimmick. Then she began to play. One by one, she dismantled them. Her style was a terrifying hybrid, a classical foundation with a hyper-modern, almost feral aggression. She was a boa constrictor. She was a silent, sudden hawk. The skepticism in her opponent's eyes turned to apprehension, and then, after a few high-profile tournaments, to pure, unadulterated fear. 8 months after she'd served Conrad Wexler his last meal, Ivy found herself in a place steeped in chess lore, Reykjavik, Iceland. It was the final table of the World Championship Candidates Tournament. A win here would mean she would challenge the world champion. Her opponent was a living legend, the man she had, as a child, beaten in a single anomalous blitz game, Grandmaster Anton Volkov. The game was not a game, it was a 6-hour war, a brutal, grinding, positional masterpiece. They traded queens early. They maneuvered knights and bishops in a slow, suffocating dance. The commentary room was silent. The global audience, numbering in the tens of millions, held its breath. After 6 hours and 42 minutes, the board was a wasteland. Rook, bishop, and 3 pawns for both. It was a dead draw, symmetrical, perfect, a wall of logic. Volkov, a gentleman of the old school with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap, leaned forward. He looked tired, but deeply, profoundly impressed. "A magnificent game, Miss Rowan," he whispered, his voice just for her. "I believe we have found equilibrium. This is a fortress. I offer you a draw." A draw was enough. With the tournament points, a draw would secure her victory. It was the safe move, the smart move, the survival move. The cameras zoomed in. The world waited for her to shake his hand. Ivy looked at the board. She looked at Volkov's offered hand, and in her mind's eye, she was back in the onyx spire. She heard Wechsler's sneer. Not everyone is cut out for this. She saw Mr. Henderson's spineless, terrified face. She saw her own reflection, pale and defeated, walking out onto the cold sidewalk. She heard Borov's voice. Survival is not victory. She pulled her hand back from the table. She looked at Volkov, and she gave him a small, sharp, kestrel smile. "I thank you for the offer, Grandmaster," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the silent hall. "But I must decline." The commentators went mad. "What is she doing?" one shrieked. "She's refusing the win. It's a dead draw." Ivy reached out. She pushed a single, humble pawn, her H-pawn, one space, a move that to the entire world looked like a suicidal, nonsensical blunder. It broke her fortress. It did nothing. Anton Volkov stared. He blinked. He followed the line. Then his eyes went wide. He stared for a full, agonizing 10 minutes. He wasn't just calculating. He was appreciating. He saw the move. And then he saw the next 5 moves. He saw the tiny, almost invisible, suffocating net she had been weaving, not for the last 10 moves, but for the last 30. The pawn push was not a blunder. It was the key. It created a single, tiny, fatal weakness. It took away a single, future escape square for his king. It was not an attack. It was Zugzwang. Volkov leaned back. He looked at this young woman, this impossible force of nature who had seen something no computer had, who had built a trap that required her opponent to be a genius to even see. He let out a long, slow breath, and then, to the shock of the entire chess world, Anton Volkov began to applaud. A slow, rhythmic, profound clap. He stood up, a true smile on his face, and extended his hand, not for a draw, but for a concession. "Bravo, Miss Rowan," he said, his voice ringing with genuine, profound respect. The world is yours. Checkmate." The headlines the next day were simple. "Kestrel is queen." A week later, Ivy, the new world champion, gave her first press conference. The room was a sea of flashbulbs. She wore a simple, elegant blazer, but she wore it like armor. The inevitable question came from a reporter in the back. "Ms. Rowan?" "Ivy. Konrad Wechsler was sentenced yesterday in federal court. Do you have a message for him?" Ivy was still. She thought about it. She could have been cruel. She could have been dismissive. Instead, she adjusted the microphone, a faint echo of the quiet waitress, but her voice, when it came, was the voice of the queen. "In chess," she said, her gaze steady and clear, "we have a saying, the pawn is the soul of the game. It is the weakest piece, the most underestimated. It can only move forward, never back. It faces attack from knights and bishops and kings." She leaned in, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "But if that pawn moves forward with enough courage, enough persistence, if it survives the arrogance of its attackers, it can cross the entire board." She paused, letting the room hang on her final words. "And it can become a queen." And just like that, the waitress became the master, and the billionaire became a cautionary tale. Ivy's journey proves that it doesn't matter what your uniform is, or what the world thinks of you. The most powerful mind in the room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the one quietly calculating the checkmate. What did you think of Ivy's incredible comeback? What was your favorite part of Konrad Wechsler's humiliation? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you loved this story of karmic justice, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have new stories just like this one coming every single week, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.